The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
Also, it's going to be fun to see the role of EVs as a mobile battery and people returning surplus electricity at certain price points back to the grid very randomly. And the grid's going to have to accept that juice and take it and do something with it as well. So that's going to be kind of another area where we need a much more intelligent grid and a lot more charging infrastructure than we've seen before.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today, on the Clean Power Hour, the Electric Report by Black Veatch, the world's largest employee-owned EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction firm, based in Kansas here in the United States, very well known in the world of renewable energy. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify so that others can find this content. And please suggest the show to a friend. That's the best thing you can do to help others find the Clean Power Hour. Connect with me on LinkedIn and at cleanpowerhour.com. With that, I want to welcome Patrick Hogan, the Chief Client Officer for Black Veatch, to the show. Welcome, Patrick.
Tim, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
I had the pleasure of working with your colleague Leslie Ponder on a panel recently, and so it's great to have Black Veatch on the show. And you know, it is heady days. We have the infrastructure bill. We have the IRA. A lot of good foundations for the energy transition. I like to say, you know, that the energy transition is going to happen whether we like it or not. There's economics are on our side now, right? Solar, wind, and batteries are the cheapest sources of power on the grid. And there's plenty of financial resources in the economy to invest in those resources. Meanwhile, as we electrify everything, meaning transportation, heavy industry, and HVAC, we're going to need 2 to 3 times more electricity on the grid. So a lot more grid infrastructure. So it's really game on in the energy sector. But Patrick, give our listeners a little background on yourself. How did you come to Black Veatch? And you know, if the energy transition is a particular interest of yours, how did you get interested in that?
Sure thing, Tim. So Black Veatch, as you said, is one of the kind of globally ranked engineering, design, and consulting firms. And we kind of help our clients build this critical infrastructure that changes the way the world relies on, energy, clean water, and instant connectivity. And we've been doing that now for nearly 108 years, believe it or not, to do that. So we're always changing and always evolving. And that, for me, was the excitement about joining Black Veatch earlier this year. My background, Tim, I'm a chemist. I try to change the world a molecule, at a time, and realize there's a lot more to get done. And I've worked both offshore and onshore, and then got progressively closer to how the molecules get turned into electrons. And the last few years, really working in the kind of built environment about lowering our energy envelope. And then my last gig was with the Honeywell Group, working on the climate tech investments. So working with a lot of startups, and which was a lot of fun learning about where that is going and how to help accelerate the decarbonization market to do that. Black Veatch, Tim, we've been working on all things decarbonization, electrification, and grid modernization. And so that kind of really helps us, I think, with our perspectives about how the market is working and where things are both technically and commercially, working at the rock face there with many of our leading investors in this area.
So Black and Veatch has published a report, the 2023 electric report. I've never seen this report before. I've reviewed the executive summary. It's it's a nice, very nicely designed, easy to read report about grid infrastructure. You surveyed a bunch of stakeholders, and maybe you can clarify for our listeners who those stakeholders are roughly. And then you break down all kinds of results and what their priorities are. For example, there's a growing trend that utility interested parties are very concerned about DERs, distributed energy resources, that's solar, wind, and batteries. And this includes utility and distributed scale resources. And that's fairly new, right? Because solar has just kind of burst onto the scene. I mean, the U.S. industry really took off in 2010. I had the pleasure of meeting a real OG in the U.S. solar, Mike Hall, the founder of Anza and another company called Borrego. And when Mike got into the industry in '02, there was a megawatt of solar happening in the U.S. market. So that gives people a point of reference. We're now doing 30 gigawatts just in the U.S. a year. And then some markets like China are doing, I think, upwards of 200 gigawatts a year. So things have changed dramatically in the last 20 years in the U.S. And then, of course, there's this whole electrification trend, which is just kind of an accelerant in a way in terms of the pressures that are going to be felt by grid operators. But how does the report get, what is the survey? Who is surveyed? And then let's get into some of the results you found.
Sure thing. Let's break that down for you, Tim. So first of all, this is our 17th annual survey that we call the Black and Veatch Electric Report. And it's one of many that we do across all of those infrastructure areas that we mentioned, both green energy, petrochemical, water, etc. We polled over 650 American utility professionals in many different sectors right across the US. And we got their feedback, both scoring against some key areas, but also a lot of kind of firsthand verbatims as well, Tim. So it really becomes a very contemporary view of where the market is today, what people's opportunities and challenges are, and certainly where they're kind of looking for help across many different parts of the decarbonization and that grid modernization needs that they have to do that. So as you mentioned, kind of a couple of key areas that are really coming out. First one was, for the first time in this 17-year report, Tim, the renewable mix coming into the grid is now the number one concern, as well as also the number one opportunity for our utility providers. And what is eclipsed is the aging infrastructure. So of course that hasn't gone away. We have you could argue, maybe one of the world's most interesting or legacy oldest systems operating at this critical mass. But really now the infusion of all these green, clean electrons at such a scale is causing a lot of both concern and opportunity. And as you said rightly, Tim, it's coupled with this never seen before incentivization, both financial as well as regulatory. And with that regulatory, there comes some kind of commitments and concerns that the utilities have to manage. And it's also coming at a time when both the private sector funding is also driving over $140 billion worth of investment last year, Tim, just in the clean energy sector. So I think our utility partners are hit both sides, right? With demands for more and more electrification, as you mentioned. How do we get the US to become carbon zero in its electricity supply by or before 2035? That's only 12 years away. So we've got to grow 35% more in that grid to get there, all of it green. And then we had this big concern that came up in the survey about how do I manage the generational mix as we move from 100% conventional to 100% renewables, using things like DERMS, like you mentioned, all these distributed mix. And then how do we deal with not only the aging infrastructure, Tim, but also these new regulations? And so a good example of that would be today there is over 2,000 gigawatts of planned power that wants to connect to the US grid. That's more than 35% of what's available today that's being generated. but the average time to get those interconnections approved is something of the order of 5 years plus. And it's causing tremendous delays, Tim, to our network, really adding to that aging, creaking concerns that we have. What it's also doing is that the capital investments are now getting, in some cases, getting shelved or paused as the utility companies or property developers, technology companies are getting concerned about when will this happen as well to do that. So that is a big demand that is, or pressure point that's going on our system, but it's being pulled through by, as you said, the tremendous demand, Tim, for all things electric in our heating, in our buildings, in our transportation, and also our manufacturing sector.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about this 2,000 gigawatts. That's a very important statistic. There's a plethora of solar, wind, and battery storage development happening. There's a lot of points of friction, though, in getting those projects out of the ground and interconnected and permitted right. And as a solar professional myself, I'm acutely aware that interconnection point is a major source of pain for the industry, for the renewables industries writ large. What, are you able to gather a point of view on that in particular? Because, like you said, greening the grid by 2035 is a pretty intense mandate. It's only 12 years away. I'm struggling sometimes to see how we can possibly do that. And, by the same token, we're down here on the hockey stick and we are about to go vertical. So it's kind of the best of times, the worst of times. But what is BNV's perspective on the role of interconnection?
I think it's a critical path, Tim, to make this happen. First of all, there's not enough, AC lines, transmission lines, right, to connect the dots, right, between the demand and the consumers and the generation sites to do that. So that's a big part. So we're going to see a lot more increase in that area. When you start bringing in these intermittent supply sources, wind, solar, etc., it creates new generation patterns that we haven't seen before. So it's also going to see the advent and the demand for new smart grids, microgrids, kind of a lot more kind of intelligence about how to manage the variability in our grid. And I think also we're going to see the influx, Tim, of a lot of energy storage systems, both chemical and hardware driven, that will really kind of smooth that out and make this a reality. So there's a lot of combinations of both investment and innovation have got to happen at the same time.
You said something that triggered my interest in a phenomenon. I'm dropping an interview this week with Craig Lewis, who is the founder and executive director of an organization called Clean Coalition. And the Clean Coalition is working with utilities and communities to develop community-scale microgrids to basically evolve the distribution and transmission utility model, whereby utilities can still invest in infrastructure, but it's infrastructure that leads to more resiliency for communities because it's a community-scale microgrid, so that when the big grid goes down because of a fire or a flood or an earthquake or some other catastrophe, you have sizable communities that can isolate from that grid and operate with wind, solar, and batteries. And this is not only, now technically feasible, but it's also financially feasible. And it's also good for the utilities, it turns out. Like, they just want to build infrastructure and that's kind of in their DNA. But when you think about the energy transition, what do you see in terms of the opportunity for community scale microgrids?
We're really excited about that area, Tim. And as you said quite rightly, right, the need to have this more distributed kind of even off-grid supply of energy is super critical just to enable the limited infrastructure we have today to better deliver what it needs against this. Also, we're excited too because many of these communities, when they do get hit by these weather-related impacts or natural disasters, it's typically the more economically deprived part of the city that kind of recovers slowest, right, and gets the kind of longest return back to normalcy as well. So we're excited about these systems being able to kind of create more of an equitable distribution of power to everyone, really raise the game in terms of the resiliency that's needed. And it really came out in our survey results as well, Tim. We saw that more than 2/3 now of the American utilities are highly focused on things like climate resiliency modeling and building in all the kind of mitigation services post-event as well to do it. Just recently, NOAA, the National Oceanic, Atmospheric and Administration, posted their August results, Tim, and the U.S. has been hit already by $15 billion plus weather-related or natural disaster events. And that doesn't include the two big disasters just recently in Maui and Florida there with fires and hurricanes. That's well over $25 billion worth of damage done to our communities, done predominantly to our power supplies. And so this is an area where these microgrids and all the intelligence that goes with it is super critical, I think, to creating the resiliency that we need for our schools, for our communities, for our manufacturing, and for life in general.
Let's talk about a few of the other particulars that you touch on in this report. For one, I would love to talk a little bit about the hydrogen economy. I'd like to talk more about resiliency, of course, topics like cybersecurity and electrification of transportation. And we could start anywhere that you see fit. And obviously it's, things like hydrogen are involved in many sectors of the economy. Hydrogen could play a role in resiliency. There already is a hydrogen economy, mostly related to fossil fuels and chemicals, but that's going to be part of, electrification of transportation, for example. But yeah, maybe you could comment on the hydrogen economy. What is BNV seeing on the opportunity for hydrogen?
Yeah, we saw it come out in our survey results as well as our own perspectives, Bob, that it's really a growing area of technology evaluation now by the utilities and other kind of power-related sectors, probably more so than we've seen in previous years. We're moving through the colors in the rainbow of hydrogen, as you mentioned. So we're moving from gray and blue, which is kind of still pretty heavily dependent on carbon-related, methane-related ways of generating hydrogen, to now green, which is converting green electrons with simple water, electrolyzing and creating this green hydrogen. What we like about it, Tim, is that it really kind of generates the power on demand where it's needed. So you can substitute the legacy carbon electrons for green ones real time. Because it's a chemical storage, think of it as a chemical battery, you can also use it to create that dispatchable power 24/7. Because it's a safe molecule to transport as well, I can take it to places or even other countries where they don't have the same availability of getting green power as well. And so that's actually easing, Tim, not only the kind of needs for green power, but even kind of this anxiety about global energy security as well to do that. Today, Black Veatch is working on over 200 hydrogen projects worldwide. So we're very bullish, and we're building the world's biggest green production of hydrogen and storage in Utah. And that's going to generate over 300 gigawatt hours of power, starting with blending green, clean hydrogen produced locally and supplying over millions and millions of customers in both the Utah and Los Angeles basin there as well to do that. And that's going to be blended in with natural gas. So what we saw with our customers' technology perspectives, huge focus on bringing in more utility scale solar to the grid. A lot of still interest around these buffer sources, particularly, as I mentioned, LNG or liquefied natural gas. Tim, we also saw the rise of small modular nuclear. So people kind of taking that now very seriously about these SMR, nuclear opportunities, the rise of hydrogen, both as a chemical way to kind of generate power on demand, but also to give you that long-term duration storage that's hyper needed as well. So lots of great balancing the bets, and we're very, we're very akin with our utility partners that they're creating this broad portfolio of long-term and short-range technology assessments. I think the way we looked at it, Tim, was they went from being kind of curious to now kind of mildly optimistic about the technical and the commercial feasibility of hydrogen. But we're very bullish just given the number of projects and customers. As you said, there's already an economy here that's working. And as we get bigger in the scale, the prices are coming down equivalent to the parity that you would expect.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. And I know many of my listeners are very skeptical about green hydrogen, for example, and I'm on the fence. What I point people to is, well, what's happening in the real world? Because when developers and utility operators and PPA buyers, the city of LA, for example, right, are investing in hydrogen projects, as you mentioned, over 200 projects just being done by Black Veatch. That means there's thousands of hydrogen projects around the world. And I love the ACES project in Utah. It's a great example of a hybrid project which involves renewables, certainly solar, and long duration storage using hydrogen in these underground caverns, and then converting what was traditionally a pure fossil power plant, a massive power plant, to a hybrid where it's going to be burning hydrogen in place of natural gas, and that's just much cleaner, less carbon intensive, right? That's the goal, is to decarbonize the grid and the economy, and so. Yeah, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a material scientist, but I am somebody who reports on technology and the economy, and I just say, look what's happening. Look where there's a there. So now on the SMR front, I'm still much more conservative about that than I am about green hydrogen, simply because it takes so long to get a nuclear project sited and constructed. Meanwhile, that 12-year window that we mentioned, right, to green the grid by 2035 means you would have to have boots on the ground, breaking ground today on some of these projects, and that's really not happening. So, again, there's no doubt the technology works. We've been using it on subs and aircraft carriers for decades, but in terms of grid infrastructure, and I don't doubt that there will be a future for nuclear, both here on Earth and in other places. In particular, I think it could work really well when we go interplanetary, as Elon Musk is planning to do on Mars, where there's less solar resources because Mars is further from the Earth. But anyway, when it comes to technology, though, I guess, Patrick, I'm curious if there are other technologies that you'd like to highlight. One of my passions of late is long duration storage. But it's a both and, right? We need short duration storage for electrification of transportation, and that's a certain technology. And then we need grid scale storage, short, medium, long duration.
Yeah, we're very aligned, Tim, there, I think, in the need for all of those areas. I mean, still, as I mentioned, don't forget the role, I think, of natural gas to be this kind of buffer that I think starts to bring the scale down, just like you mentioned with the ACES project. That blended mix of new molecule with old molecule, I think, is also going to help us get to that lower cost of, kind of equivalized energy costs. And just in the same way we saw it with the solar cost curve coming down over many years as well. And we got to do this with and without regulations and with and without the kind of incentive as, to kind of get to that level of confidence around it. As a technology advocate and a company that is always working kind of first of the kind, we like to kind of spread our bets and work with our clients across many different kind of return investment cycles there, Tim, to do that. We've even seen another demand for bringing in the use of ammonia, which is another kind of green molecule, to help kind of reduce the amount of coal-fired power generation. So kind of bringing ammonia and coal together, that's another way to kind of reduce the carbon and the emissions issues as well in our global power systems as well. So I think it's really just have this open mindset, Tim, and it's working. The economics is getting better. The technology is getting of scale, and we're kind of working every day with OEMs and utilities and big program developers to kind of scale up, create that modular approach, and get the performance data that everyone needs to be more confident. So people like yourself, I think, can get behind the data, get behind the science.
In our last few minutes together, Patrick, I'd like to talk about a topic that's a little more esoteric, and then maybe round it out with a quick conversation about electrification of transportation. But your report covers cybersecurity, and anyone who really does a deep dive on grid infrastructure, whether that's legacy infrastructure or future technologies, wind, solar, batteries, recognizes that cybersecurity is a major concern for grid infrastructure. And it is one of the things that keeps me up at night, so to speak. The thought that a foreign power could take down the United States grid. If the grid goes down, okay, if there's a catastrophic event, whether it's a storm from the sun, right, a solar storm, or some man-made catastrophe, if the grid goes down and cannot be rebuilt in any timely manner, people starve en masse. It's a cataclysmic event for humanity. We're so dependent, right, on refrigeration, on transportation, on lighting, etc., for our everyday economy. The economy is so dependent on the grid, and our personal well-being is just completely tied to that, in the West, certainly. But what did B&V learn about cyber, and do you have any any potions for me so that I'm not having these nightmares at night?
Well, I think you're wise to be concerned, Tim. I mean, just in the last 6 months, so the first 6 months of this year, I think the U.S. electricity grid had a 10x intentional cyber hacking activity rise, right? So that's pretty scary, right? So you're absolutely right. It's very much a target. I think the good news is the utilities have all shown in the survey data from Black Veatch that their interest levels, their awareness, their funding has increased, and that they are really understanding, I think, the levels of vulnerability that the aged as well as the new equipment has brought in. We're seeing a couple of things, Tim, that are really driving more, I think, confidence. The time to vet new equipment or new software to be cyber secure is rapidly reducing, meaning the industry is getting smarter about bringing in smart, resilient, kind of rugged technology that works at scale at this industrial national level to do that. We did feel, though, that there was a level of overconfidence, to be clear. And I think that we felt that people couldn't, for instance, Tim, recognize how much of their budget was being spent on cyber defense and whether they were using the latest frameworks that were kind of meeting the kind of national recommendations from various Homeland Security and other kind of organizations. So that is a concern. The potion, we would argue that there are companies like ourselves that can help you take a cyber resiliency assessment today, get a baseline, Tim, of where you are, where you need to be relative to where you think you should be. We'll also share with you that delta where you should be based on the latest recommendations and standards, as well as do that kind of bad actor, good actor testing of your system to do that. But this is an area, absolutely right, Tim. You cannot take it for granted. The state of the art is highly advanced in terms of the malicious acts that are out there, whether it's phishing for your customer data and their privacy data, all the way through to a denial of the grid supply to do that. So we see this as one of the biggest vectors that has to be addressed. And as we bring new technologies that have never been seen before into the grid, we're going to create new sources of potential vulnerability as well as new forms of protection for the grid as well.
Well said. So electrification of transportation, transportation has a huge carbon footprint, something like 40%, I think, of CO2e is related to transportation. And the economics of just electric vehicles, for example, cars and trucks, are such that, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, those electric vehicles, which have a slight premium today, are going to be more cost effective than internal combustion engine vehicles. And so consumers are just going to go en masse, right, in droves. This happens faster in places where energy is more expensive, because it is much more economical to operate a car or truck on electricity than it is on gasoline or diesel. But here in the United States, we're a relatively slow adopter. We just passed the 5% mark, I think, in 2023 now, that new car sales have reached the 5% mark, and that's great. We just need 4 more doublings, and we'll reach that 100% mark. But what did you learn about electrification that is interesting to our listeners?
Yeah, the electrification of transportation is arguably the biggest demand on our grid here in the States, Tim. Bloomberg kind of predicts by 2035, so again, not too far away, more than 50% of our vehicles will be some form of electric propulsion that are active kind of on our streets to do that. Black & Veatch has been involved already in installing well over a third of the EV infrastructure charging stations across North America. And that's going to be the biggest hurdle to overcome, Tim, is just getting access to more and more of that critical infrastructure. And there's a lot of innovation around the charging speed, the access, making it sure that it's always available and affordable, right, to different parts of the world. I think beyond the passenger growth, which is phenomenal, just think in Q2, California, which is a bellwether state for all things EV, they grew EV sales, Tim, by 70% compared with Q1 this year. So that rate of change is going to put tremendous demand on our infrastructure, the demand for more green electrons, these dispensers that have to work and kind of overcome not only range anxiety, but charging anxiety as well. The biggest change that we see is this commercial fleet scenario. As more and more trucking and logistics companies become electric, we're seeing some great results lately about the efficiencies there. That has to have different kinds of charging infrastructure for different use cases, different shifts that we haven't seen before. Also add on things like off-road vehicles, both in our docks, mining, etc. That's going to create even more demand as well, Tim, there from the transportation area. Also, it's going to be fun to see the role of EVs as a mobile battery and people returning surplus electricity at certain price points back to the grid very randomly. And the grid's going to have to accept that juice and take it and do something with it as well. So that's going to be kind of another area where we need a much more intelligent grid and a lot more charging infrastructure than we've seen before to do that. So transportation's number one, Tim, followed by number two in our survey was manufacturing sector. Think of a lot more onshoring here in the States, chip manufacturer, those EV battery manufacturing, very energy intense systems. And then just like you and I here are using cloud storage to have a Zoom call, the rise of data storage and things like Chat GPT is using 8 to 10 times more electricity per computation than traditional calculations as well. So we're going to see tremendous amount more demand. And then lastly, it's the rise of the commercial and residential building that is 100% electric, all appliances, heating, air conditioning, etc. So tremendous growth that we've never seen before, creating new markets, also some new challenges on our grid as we modernize and decarbonize.
And do you have a statistic? I like to say 2 to 3 times as much electricity we will consume once we make the transition to electrifying everything. But have you guys quantified that? Because that's always of interest to me.
Yeah, I think we're seeing similar numbers. I've seen 3 to 4, Tim.
Okay.
I've also seen a number in the hundreds of trillions of dollars that needs to get spent as well as if that helps you give kind of more of a scale of the size of the prize in order to get to a net zero economy somewhere in that 2040 to 2050 range as well at a global level. So that's a lot of stuff to be done, a lot of infrastructure that's needed, and certainly a lot of technologies that have to be assessed. And let's leverage those $96 billion worth of federal U.S. funds that have been set aside for all things electric grid as well.
Well, we're out of time, but I want to thank you, Patrick, for coming on the show today, Patrick Hogan. And please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. Those two platforms in particular are the best way to help others find the content. Check out our YouTube channel. We're dropping 2 videos a week, soon more. And reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to hear from my listeners and love chatting you up. So I will definitely respond if you reach out to me. You can also reach out at the website cleanpowerhour.com. With that, I want to encourage our listeners to check out this report. If you just Google Black Veatch Electric Report, you will find the website. The website is bv.com, very simple URL. And how can our listeners find you, Patrick?
I think at bv.com or through LinkedIn. Look forward to hearing from your listeners, Tim, and thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate all the great work and innovation and insights that you're sharing too with the industry.
And we will put a link to the report in the show notes as well. So you can find the show notes at cleanpowerhour.com. I want to thank Patrick Hogan, Chief Client Officer for Black Veatch, for coming on the show today.
It's been a pleasure, Tim. Thank you, sir.
Let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague. Take care. Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have Chin Power Systems, the leading 3-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America. So check out CPS America. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. You know, we're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chinpowersystems.com to find out more.